The Stranger Things theme isn't just music, it's a hack. Those first arpeggios don't merely sound nostalgic. They hijack your attention and drag your brain into a loop of craving and prediction. It feels like dopamine. And what's really interesting is that most of you weren't even alive in 1983. Yet, when that theme plays, you feel homesick, like you lost something. Today, we're going to dissect how old-school synth technology, repetition, and imperfection can create borrowed nostalgia, a memory you never lived but your brain reacts to anyway. Welcome to the logic of imperfection. Let's address the paradox first. If you were born after 1990, you don't have real memories of the 80s, yet that theme triggers longing. So, what's happening? Your brain is not retrieving real memories, but it's building familiarity from cultural fragments you have absorbed for years. Films, VHS aesthetics, Carpenter soundtracks, arcade vibes, glowing synth texture, childhood images you didn't experience directly, but that you have inhaled through pop culture. Not a false memory in the clinical sense, more like synthetic nostalgia. Your brain is tagging a sound as safe, known, and warm, even if it's borrowed. The Stranger Things theme by Dixon and Stein is basically an arpeggiated loop, an ostinato that keeps your brain waiting. Repetition creates expectation. Expectation creates attention, and attention becomes craving. Now, normally the brain adapts to repetition, it habituates, it tunes out. But Stranger Things doesn't let you tune out because the sound itself is alive. The Prophet 5, in fact, isn't perfectly stable. The tuning, the envelope, the tiny phase shifts, it's never a copy-paste identical signal. So your brain gets trapped in a perfect storm. Predictable pattern plus unpredictable texture. Your mind keeps sampling it like, is something changing? Is something coming? Where is the resolution? And you stay hooked. Compare this to John Carpenter's Halloween theme, which I broke down in a previous video. Carpenter used the same minimalist synth approach, but created pure dread instead of wistful yearning. In Halloween, that famous 5/4 pulse makes you uneasy. Your brain can't settle into it. The rhythm itself feels wrong, like you're walking downstairs and one step is missing. Stranger Things does the opposite. It's in 4/4, steady, hypnotic, safe. So your body relaxes. But harmonically, it never gives you closure. And notice the exact shape of the hook. It just doesn't climb, it climbs and then it falls back down. C, E, G, B, and then C, B, G, E. That hook sounds comforting because it's basically a C major 7th arpeggio. Now, a major 7th chord sounds warm, but it contains a built-in tension. That extra note, the so-called 7th, is like an unfinished sentence, and it keeps your brain waiting for resolution. It's like a smile with a hidden sadness inside, or a sentence that stops right before the final word, or a Netflix episode that cuts to black right before the reveal. Your brain keeps waiting for the payoff, and it never comes. Listen here. By the way, on screen you see the exact parameters I used on the Arturia Prophet 5 emulation to create a sound that reminds the real one. That theme doesn't recreate the 80s. It recreates the movie version of the 80s, which is itself a romanticized fiction. We're experiencing nostalgia for nostalgia, a copy of a copy. But your brain doesn't care about this philosophical problem. It just wants that familiarity hit. Dixon and Stein grew up obsessed with John Carpenter's scores and Tangerine Dream soundtracks. They weren't recreating a lived experience. They were channeling their artistic heroes, translating the dark synth aesthetics they loved into something that could carry a Netflix series. And what makes it brilliant is that by following that artistic vision, they ended up creating a sonic formula that triggers nostalgia even in people who never lived through the era they are referencing. The Prophet 5 is a beautiful liar. That's because analog synths don't behave like spreadsheets. They drift, they wobble, they breathe. Not in a messy way, but just enough to feel alive. And actually, you don't need memories of the 80s to feel that. You only need memories of imperfect media. Most of us, in fact, grew up hearing sound that wasn't clinically perfect. Tape, old TVs, radio compression, cheap speakers. So when a sound slightly wobbles, your brain instantly goes, this feels real. Now, this doesn't mean that analog is magic while digital is fake, because digital plugins nowadays can simulate analog almost perfectly. The real point is simpler. Imperfection is a cue. It signals something human, something lived in, something trustworthy. And in a world of perfect digital clarity, the tiny imperfection feels like home. Now, I know what you're thinking. What about Kraftwerk? They built an empire on precision. Trans-Europe Express, the robots, computer word. That stuff is cold, tight, machine-like perfection. But please, pay attention to the difference. Kraftwerk didn't aim for nostalgia. They aimed for the future, for the clinical beauty of machines. They weren't trying to comfort your inner child. They were introducing you to your future replacement. And a lot of people genuinely found it fascinating. I was one of them, by the way. Dixon and Stein are doing the opposite. They are not showing you tomorrow. They are making you miss yesterday, even if yesterday wasn't yours. And for that, they need the sound to breathe, to fail slightly, to wobble, to feel mortal. Because in the human mind, imperfection often equals soul. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Stranger Things is not set in the real 1983. It's set in a fictional cinematic version of 1983. And that matters because if you listen to real 80s pop like Erasure or OMD, a lot of it was actually cleaner and more polished than people remember. Back then, they weren't trying to sound nostalgic. They were trying to sound modern, to sound like the future. Stranger Things, once again, does the opposite. It doesn't recreate the 80s, it recreates the feeling of the 80s. Or more precisely, the feeling of being a kid in a dark movie theater, watching a mysterious story while synth music makes everything feel larger than life. So, what we're hearing is not history, it's mythology. Nostalgia for nostalgia, a copy of a copy. How about now? We live in an era of terrifying digital perfection. Photos are razor sharp, music is perfectly quantized, vocals are perfectly tuned. Everything is measured and tracked. Nothing decays, nothing fades or disappears. And in a world like that, people start craving the opposite. They crave warmth, imperfection, something that feels human. And that's why we cling to the slight wobble of a Prophet 5, whether it comes from analog behavior or deliberate modulation. It's not that we want the real 1983 with all its real problems. What we want is the safe 1983, the romantic one, the version that feels honest, even though it's engineered. And this raises the ultimate question. If you know you're being manipulated by a simulation of the past, why does it still make you cry? Because your heart doesn't care about historical accuracy. It cares about connection. And sometimes, a fake memory is the only way to reach a very real emotion.